What's up, marketing maniacs, and welcome back to another episode of From Startup to Wunderbrand, your ultimate BFF in the wide world of digital marketing. Join me, your host, Nicholas Kuhne, spilling the beans on the juiciest trends and hottest tips to up your marketing game. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Today we have the Reverend Dr. David Chotka, who is the... Chotka, did I say it?
You said it well. Well done.
Damn it.
Oh,
Okay.
Blessed.
Okay, so we'll keep that in there. I just looked at it. Wait a minute, did I pronounce that correctly? So I always try and check beforehand. Reverend Dr. David Chotka is the founder and director of Spirit Equipped Ministries, an interdenominational equipping ministry focused on developing spiritual disciplines. He's also the past chair of the Alliance Pray Team, a ministry developed by the General Assembly of the C&MA Canada to serve as a catalyst to develop prayer, equipping resources, and leading events across the movement and beyond. Pastor David has earned 4 degrees, 3 of them in theology and spirituality, and serves as an adjunct instructor in the Pathway School for Ministry. Now, you may be wondering, why do I have a pastor on the show? We generally don't talk religion on the show. Politics, religion, that's normally kept for Drunken Fridays. But this is a Friday, it's not drunken, unfortunately. But we're talking about, how does one market a ministry like this? How does one publish a book? And Pastor David has published 4, and I'm sure a couple more are in the pipeline as well. So we're going to be talking about that, the impact of social media, and especially the difference between dealing with small, large, and then self-publishing books. So, Pastor David, wonderful to have you with us tonight.
Well, thank you. It's good to talk from across the Atlantic. I know you're in Norway and I'm in Canada, so that's remarkable.
Yeah, I'm doing some traveling. This next week we're going to Finland, which is a first for us, which is quite exciting.
Yes, well, that's actually pretty close in comparison to what our conversation is.
Exactly, but equally cold. I'm not sure what the weather's like in Canada right now, but it's slowly warming up, but then it sort of goes from +3 to minus whatever here. So it's a roller coaster. So let's get into this. I want to talk about some of your books and the process of publishing books. If we go back to the history in the industry or the ministry that you're in, books have been central, or the written word has been quite central to the spread of Christianity. How important are books now in either maintaining or the sort of Christian fellowship around the world? And how difficult is it to sort of penetrate a market where books are now, there are many books on a shelf rather than just the Bible and prayer books?
Well, sure. Well, I will tell you that there's been a dramatic shift in publishing, big shift. And I got caught in the crosswinds on that. So my first book came out. I had finished the manuscript in 2007, was polishing it in 2008. And then it was picked up by a small publishing house who had 12 staff. And then the great crash of 2008 happened. He had to let go so many of his staff, and the marketing part fell to me. And, you know, I'm a pastor. Here's how I market. Oh, by the way, give to my church. That's what I did. But regardless of this, right around that time, you started to see digital media move in. And you started to see the rise of social media. In fact, I think it was 2004 or 5 that Facebook even came on the market. And in those days, different groups were competing to get that part of the thing. And the internet was just starting to come alive. And what's now on the world stage with printing is very different than it was back even when I started. In those days, print media, you didn't need an agent. You need anybody to represent you. You would just talk to a person, and the next thing you know, you get a contract with some company and they'd market your book for you. And now you just can't do that. In fact, the thing that was of great distress to me was when my first book was published. It was a book called Power of Praying. It was a book on the Lord's Prayer. A large publishing house said that they wanted me, and they kept me on a string. I won't tell you the name, but I talked to the head of this big corporation. He loved my manuscript, thought it was marvelous. And his wife had gone to a seminar that I had done, and she had done the pillow talk to persuade the guy to have a chat with me. And the connection thing is really important. And then she spoke to me and said, oh, by the way, I've told my husband you're a good author, you know, so give me the manuscript. So I gave it to her. She gave it to him. Then we had a steak dinner, and he said, oh, we're going to just do this. I think your book is marvelous. But his editorial team said no, but he didn't say no because the book was poor. And I said, well, what's the problem? And he said, you're not going to like it. I said, well, what? Would you please tell me? He said, well, okay, sit down and just don't attack the messenger. I'll just tell you what they told me. Number one, you're not famous. Number two, you're not American. And number three, your congregation is less than 3,000 people. And that means that we're not going to make any money on your book, so we're not going to publish your book. I said, was there a problem with the manuscript? He said, nope, best book I read on the topic, best bunch. It's just we'd have to spend $100,000 and you'd have to resign your church and go all over the United States and Canada. And of course, the English-speaking world in particular, to market your book by being present to book sale things. And I know you're not going to do that. Anyway, so I got really depressed. So my wife would say, how you doing? I'd say, terrible. She'd say, why? So I'm not American, Oh, my church is less than 3,000. Oh, by the way, I'm not famous, And this went on for quite a while. And then a hand up came. And the hand up includes a faith component. I'm happy to not share that if you don't want your audience to hear that.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, no. So here's what happened. So what the guy from that big company said was that I needed a million seller in a similar trajectory book market who would believe in me and write the forward. And I knew a million sellers in different constituencies, but I had no relationship with somebody who wrote in the field that I wrote in. And I just remember the crazy moment. I went into my church office and I closed the door, and I was still whining. In Canada, we call it crying in your beer. I don't know what you call that over there. It means the salt comes down from your cheeks and lands inside your barley and hops,
Yeah.
Anyway, I was whining. So I sat down, I said to the office, I am putting this thing on hold here. Nobody's going to talk to me. I'm going to take the morning. I'm going to try and figure this out. So I locked the door. I put the do not disturb on the phone. I closed the computer screen and I sat down and I whined for about half an hour to the Lord saying, well, I'm not American. I'm not famous. I'm less than 3. I had 1,200 people in my church. I had a big church, right? And it wasn't big enough for those boys. Thank you very much. Anyway, so eventually, as I was sitting there, I started to pray and I said, oh God, what am I supposed to do? And this book here is a million seller in prayer. It's called The Workbook of Living Prayer. And that's sold 1 million copies and it's in 16 languages and it covers the planet. And the guy who wrote this is a very wonderful kind of fella. Anyway, I'd never met him. He was American. He's 33 or 34 years older than I am. I was in Northern Canada. He was in Southern United States. He spoke with a Southern accent. I spoke with like a Canadian and put the word A at the end of all my sentences, that kind of thing. Anyway, the bottom line is I didn't know the guy. He was in a different denomination than I was in. There was no overlapping streams. I'd never been to an event. I'd never studied a course with him. He didn't know me. And if we'd have bumped into each other on the sidewalk and both fell down, we would have been kind to each other and busted each other off, but we didn't know. So I was sitting in this office and I get this sense in my soul. A fiery presence lands on me and I hear this voice. Call the author of this book. Call Maxie Dunham. Call him. Ask him to help you. He'll help you. And I thought, that's dumb. That's just crazy. I can't do that. It wouldn't leave. The sense wouldn't leave. And I you say to yourself, how am I going to do a cold call to an internationally renowned multi-nation kind of guy? I mean, I'm a pastor at a church in Northern Alberta. Thank you very much. Anyway, with the date now, it's less than 3. I only had 1,200. So in the middle of this, I thought, okay, I'll take the shot. And I opened the computer screen. I Googled his name. And I got the seminary where he was the president. So he's president of a seminary. So this is an internationally renowned guy. Anyway, so I decide, okay, so there's a phone number. I call it, and the man had left the office like 2 minutes before I called. He just stepped out. He's going to be gone for hours. And so the secretary said, why are you calling him? I said, well, I'm consulting with him about a manuscript, which was true. But it made it sound like, made it sound like I knew the guy and he had the manuscript already. And I said, can I have his email? And she gave it to me. She wasn't supposed to. And so I got this email. So I wrote a note and I'd read 7 of this guy's books. And I wrote nice things about all 7 of them. I said, dear Maxie, my name is, and by the way, I read this book and here's what it did for me. And I read this book and here's what it did for me, et cetera. Got all the way down the list. And then we came to the last one. And then I said, oh, by the way, I have shaped a manuscript. It's similar in its framework to what you do, although the content's different. Would you consider taking a look at the manuscript sincerely? David, I pressed send and I thought, well, I just wasted a morning. I just wrote to this guy who travels to nations all over the earth, and he's got students coming out of his pores and he doesn't know me and I'm not in his denomination. So anyway, I just forgot about it and went back to work. And that afternoon, he wrote me back and he said, dear David, thank you for the warm words about your manuscript. I'll help you. I have a 2-day window, 2 weeks from now. If you can get that manuscript into my hands within 2 weeks, I will look at it and talk to you. So I thought, wasn't that nice? In those days, I had a photocopier that had to do one page at a time. There was no auto feed, see? And the manuscript was 300 pages long, 300. So I stood in the hallway and I made this photocopy one page at a time. And then I packaged it and I raced down to the post office. And you guys live in euros. So let me think of it. It'd be about 50 euros, something like that. I paid that much for overnight on the spot delivery kind of thing to get it into this famous author's hands, And I thought, oh, David Chotka, you just wasted 50 euros. You spent an afternoon. The guy doesn't know you from a hole in the ground, and he's just not going to give you the time of day. And so I'm doing hospital visits, and I'm driving on this ring road going around this big city. And I had my very first ever cell phone. And it was one of those flip phones because I'm a Star Trek guy. So live long and prosperous.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I have the flip phone, and there was no legislation about phones in those days and driving. So I'm driving the ring road, phone rings. I flip open the phone, and this man with a Southern accent starts to speak, and he says, "Hello, David. This is Maxie Dunham." Then he said something that just blew me out of the water. "God has commanded me to make you successful." I said, "What?" He said, "Yes, I'm supposed to help you." And now listen, I know where there's distracted driving legislation now. I just about had an accident. So this friendship, he's a million-selling author. He wrote the foreword to the first book. And then then he asked me to help him edit materials that he was preparing because I had expertise in the micro niche he was talking about in the next. And so I wound up editing some of his material for him, and it became a mutual relationship. And then we became friends over the phone. Then I did doctoral studies, and the area of study was the area of expertise. He became the second reader of my manuscript. And as it turned out, this one was amazing. I was at an American seminary, and when you do a doctorate, you have to, first of all, do a series of coursework projects. Once you get the assignments done, then the instructor of the program takes you for lunch, looks you in the eye and say, "Okay, now you have to make a scholarly contribution in an understudied area." And he said, "What are your areas of expertise?" I said, "Prayer Life of Jesus, I wrote a book, and Spirit and Paul. And oh, by the way, Gordon Fee wrote a book and I studied with him." He said, "That's too bad." They're both covered.
Oh, no.
So then he said, "But listen, I have this." He opens his briefcase up and he pulls out a book. And the book was called Discerning God's Will Together. It was an upper room book from 1997. He said, "This is the first book on how to hear the voice together in human history. It is being used in this city by 7 churches. Why don't you examine the roots of that material to determine if it's consistent and faithful with church practice, et cetera, that kind of thing. And then, interact with the authors and so on if you could do this. And that would be a great thesis." And I agreed. He said, "You need a second reader." So I gave the name of my friend who had become my friend over the miles. And he said, "Yeah, he's a good choice. He's written, my co-writer of this last book has written 50 books. And so the hand up came because the established author gave me a hand.
So it's basically the Stephen King of Christian literature.
Really, you know what? That would be I think they would both be appalled. Their names joined together. One talks about murder and death. And
exactly.
The other talks about Jesus and love. Yeah. So get back to this. So anyway, he's a very renowned author, and he was the head of the Upper Room Publishing House. He'd retired from that. He was now the head of Asbury Seminary at the time. But anyway, I give his name, and the professor says, "Good choice." Now, here's the interesting thing. I was studying hearing the voice with people together. Only one book in human history up to 1997. Only one. Lots and lots of books on hearing the voice, nothing on how to hear it together. And so I call up, I sent a note to Maxie, and I said to him, "Would you consider the possibility of being my second reader?" He writes back, he said, "David, I've been commanded to make you succeed." He said, "But my best friend wrote a book on hearing the voice together. It's called Discerning God's Will Together." It was the same book. He was the author, his best friend.
Ah.
Now, there's 330 Americans. There's 40 million Canadians. And I have a book that's the first in human history on that topic in front of me because my prof had presented it to me as a possible thesis topic. I asked this guy to be my second reader, and he's best friends with the author. The small hairs, you can see there's no hair left on the top of my head. It all just came off. So I have this, I meet the guy, and he becomes a great friend. And I find out they've been best friends for 25 years. And I entered into their friendship. So the hand up in this case was making a warm connection with those 2 authors. And they had expertise that I did not have. They knew about writing and publishing, although it was older writing and publishing. The other thing that had to happen was I had to learn how to use social media. And so when I started in this work in 2020, I established this ministry in 2020. And my bishop said to me, David, you're teaching all these things. It's as important for our movement. If I can find a way to get you paid, would you consider becoming someone who does this full time? I said, getting paid is very helpful. I think that's very helpful,
Yes.
So anyway, good as his word, he found that. He set up a stream for me to be able to do this. And I'm still living in the after effect of that decision in 2019. Anyway, as it turned out, this man started to coach me and help me. And I wound up scrolling. So I had to learn social media. So my son said, Dad, let me show you how to scroll on Facebook. I didn't know how to do that. So he gives me a Facebook account and I'm scrolling. And as I'm scrolling, I run across the very famous author of the Chicken Soup series, Jack Canfield. And he's talking with a guy named Steve Harrison, and Jack Canfield and Stephen Harrison are saying they have a program to teach you how to market your books because you got to get your message out. And so I enrolled in that, and then COVID hit, oh my heavens, you're trying to become somebody who travels and teaches. And the next thing you know, I can't go 100 kilometers without getting my license plate. In Canada, I don't know what happened in Norway. In Canada, you were not allowed to drive 100 kilometers. And for about 2 years. And
I was in Malaysia during that time and we weren't allowed leaving our condominium. So
well, there you go.
You had it much easier.
Well, I guess, but I mean, the borders were sealed. We couldn't travel. And the only thing I had was social media.
Yeah.
And so I enrolled in this course and I met Jack Canfield. I met the Chicken Soup for the Soul author. And then I asked him to write the foreword of the book that came out of that process. And so here's another one that I wrote. Hey, there, it's me, God, How to Listen, Test, and Know When God Speaks. Forward by Jack Canfield. And so what that did was to create, how do I say this? An entry point for people to consider your product. Yeah. And so what was helpful for me in both of those cases was that people who were established in their fields gave you the hand up, and I met them. I did pay to go to that event to meet Jack Canfield. So that was a pricey thing. That there was this process where I could come in and I could pay X number of $1,000 in American. I'm not sure how that translates into euros, but regardless, it was pricey.
Yeah.
But I'll just tell you again, the same sort of thing happened. And there's an old saying, and it's not Christian. I think it's Buddhist. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yeah.
And I wasn't ready. And then when I needed to make that commitment, this guy, Steve Harrison, who ran this program to help burgeoning authors learn how to do this and learn the ropes, I had gone over to one of my friends' houses and you could meet, if the person was in your bubble, you could meet them. And this guy, and I had to sit 6 feet away from him. I had to have a mask on. That's what was required. And he said, what's your next step? I said, I need to meet Jack Canfield. The trouble is, it's pricey. And he said, I'll pay for it. I said, what? He said, yeah, I'll pay for it. You're supposed to meet Jack Canfield. And I thought, okay. That was Sunday afternoon. Monday night was the weekly course on learning social media marketing and learning to become somebody who could market on Amazon and et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of that day, Steve, who ran the program, said, listen, if you're interested in the Canfield retreat, stay on the end of the class. You have to be able to tell me you can pay for it. And the day before, I'd received this ability. So, I mean, the bottom line is, it's the network of relationships that creates the possibility of creating a partnership, which in the course of time leads to shared marketing and shared ideas, which then creates the nexus around social media influence. So,
well, you've touched on a couple of points there. One that you missed out is ask and ye shall receive, because
if
you hadn't put it out there, and this is why prayer, I think, is important. If you manifest, words become sort of manifest. If they leave your body, and by you saying this is what you would like to do, there are people out there who are, destined, or whose mission it is, whether they know it or not, is to help other people in small ways like this. Now, the second thing is, or the first thing that you spoke about, is influencer marketing. And that ties in exactly with what we're discussing here, the influencer marketing being Dave Canfield and the other folks who had a larger following, and you are bolting onto the sort of halo effect or their network.
That's what it is.
And that's extremely important. I mean, that's how a lot of brands have grown. And if we think about influencer marketing, I mean, we can look at the disciples, and they are the first, big influences, if one looks
Beautifully
in the
said. You
Christian
can
world.
say that about, yes,
And
true.
and they used, direct mail marketing as well in terms of the letters to the Ephesians and things like that. So there are a lot of, I talk to a lot of marketers in terms of how when I started marketing 20 years ago, there was no Facebook, no Instagram, no ChatGPT, any of these
Yes.
things. And we had to do things in an old-fashioned way. But there were more old-fashioned ways before that in terms of marketing. But the fundamentals of marketing, regardless of how the technology changes, is the people aspect. And one of the things that I suppose helped you succeed in this was not just that you had a network and you were willing to put yourself out there, which is obviously very important, but the quality of your product, which in this
Yes.
case was your book. If you had a trash book, no matter how lovely your sales pitch was, no matter how good your personality was, you wouldn't have got through the door. So,
Well, that's it. And so
yeah.
I did get coached. I mean, so Steve Harrison had people working on his staff who would work with Macmillan Publishers in New York. And they had self-published authors, and they had people who were million sellers on his staff. And so I got this coaching from somebody who actually, he wasn't a published author himself, but he surrounded himself with them. And he created a package to train me. And so I would actually say, if you're getting started and you don't know what to do, there are quality products out there that you can sign into for a relatively low cost to learn the networks. And what he said, this is interesting for social marketing. He said, your book will not be, it's unlikely your book's going to become a million seller. If it is, you're going to succeed, and that's going to be marvelous. Usually a book is a calling card for your speaking ministry, for your engagements, for your, whatever it was. And you have to have 6 or 7 different clusters around you in order to do this. And so he said, you got to have a YouTube channel. You have to have a blog. You have to have a Facebook page. You have to have an Instagram account. You have to have a book. You have to have an audio book. You have to have an ebook, et cetera. And he said, put all of them together, and then you have to work the network using Google and using Amazon and using Facebook and using Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, there'll be another 2 or 3 names that we'll add in the course of time here. So
yeah.
I hired a young admin. So this lady did the social media marketing for a car firm. And so when she decided she wanted to stay home, they just had a baby, and she didn't want to work in that car dealership and spend a lot of time away from her newborn. And she was somebody I knew very well, and I was very thankful. And she actually sold me my car. That's how I met the girl. Anyway, she had great skills. And so I thought she wanted a half-time job, and inside my budget was enough money to be able to do that. And what I actually did at the beginning, I taught a group of psychotherapists in Los Angeles. They paid me for teaching them weekly, and I used that to pay the girl. So it was a bit of creative marketing. You know what I'm saying? You find a niche to fund what will be helpful to you. And it was worth my investment in time to work with that group of psychotherapists around, the human issues are the same, whether you're dealing this from a secular perspective or whether you're dealing this from a faith perspective. The bottom line is, when you're in a counseling office, you're in a counseling office, and you have no choice except to get at the roots of whatever the person is dealing with and recognize that the presenting issue probably isn't the real issue, et cetera. So I do that with those guys. They paid me, and that made it possible for me to pay the half-time associate. And as a result, that person has far more skill with social media. And she actually got a free course that was offered by my government. The Canadian government offered this course on how to market through Google, et cetera, et cetera. So I trained her by making it possible to pay for her to do this. And the Ontario government of the province that I'm in paid for her to go to that class because they believed in training young people. So you look for these angles to create multiple points of entry into your market and your preferred market. And actually, one of the most important things that I learned from Harrison and Canfield is, give me the ideal picture of the person you're trying to sell your product to, and then develop your marketing around that niche. Don't try and market to everyone. Market around the niche that you're trying to enter into. And right now, for example, I've just learned about podcasting. This is a fun little thing. I don't know if you know this. So I just signed up for Podmatch in December because Steve Harrison, the guy who ran this firm, said, you're going to have to get in front of constituencies that don't know you. why don't you sign up for Podmatch? And I did. And what I did was I just said yes to all the ones that were in my thing. And here's what happened. They made the top 10. In the first month, I got a note from the founder of Podmatch. He said, congratulations, you're in the top 10. And now some of the other people in the top 10 want to interview me about what I'm doing, which means that they have, and I did this in my first month. For them, it took years to get, I don't know how I did it. I think I tripped over my shoelaces, banged my head, and discovered that I hit my head against a rock of diamond, a beautiful diamond. So now I'm in the top 1% on the planet for pod host guests. So that's why you're talking to me.
Yeah.
I laugh a lot. People like it.
Yeah. Well, you talk about a couple of interesting points there. Having that ideal person is what we call a persona. So in marketing, we have your marketing personas, and it makes it much easier, again, as you said, to focus your marketing attention if you can, create an amalgamation of what that perfect person would look like. So yeah,
five or six characteristics, you name it.
Yeah.
And then when you do spend resources to advertise, you target that constituency.
Now, you spoke about having this collection of media around you. And I think for anyone wanting to launch a book or publish a book, you do have to have a couple of those platforms, especially if you are an unknown author. If you go to a publisher with nothing, they're going to say buzz off. But if you already have a following on Facebook or following on TikTok or following on, and you have numbers, they might creak open the door a teeny little bit. You might see some sunlight.
Well, actually, what you're saying is completely true. If you don't have X number of thousand people on your following, they're not going to look at you.
Yeah.
And the assumption now from a publisher, even the established guys, they want you to be involved in the marketing just as much as they are.
So that's what I wanted to. So my experience with publishers, and especially my dad's a published author as well, and the marketing generally is quite abominable, to be honest, because they've got hundreds of different titles, and they've only got 3 or 4 marketers, so they can't really. You have to do a lot of your own marketing. And my dad wasn't a great marketer in that sense. Let's maybe talk about the difference between small publisher, large publisher, and then self-publishing. But
let me start with
I'm just gonna. So I've just got to go back a little step quickly because I had a brilliant thing I wanted to ask you about, which is probably going to slip my mind as I've said it. It's gone. So we're going to have to talk about starting with small publishers. Let's go.
Sure. So, well, the publisher that I started off with had 12 people on his staff. And he indicated that when I said yes to him, he would then use his staff to advertise the book and so on and so forth. And the crash of 2008 and 9 occurred, and everybody lost money and all kinds of people lost their shirts. In fact, the town I'm living in right now, Windsor, went through a terrible depression because it was an auto industry car place. And so like 19% unemployment, and people were cutting back everything. And even the big guys, I mean, we're talking about the big publishers like Harper One and some of the people in New York, they were saying to their already established authors, we're not going to put your book out because the market cannot sustain new product for a season. I mean, even the big guys had got that cut. And so I started to publish when the big guys were cutting back. So NavPress vanished. And some of these, right now in the United States, all of these publishing houses are amalgamating because they want to be efficient with their time, and they don't care about the face statement anymore. They only care about the marketing product. Have you got a constituency that you're aiming for? So Harper One owns Zondervan, and Zondervan used to be a very strong Dutch Reform kind of publishing house. Same with Eerdmans.
I had lots of Bible books from Zondervan. I remember.
Well, there you go.
Kid, yeah.
Yeah, Zondervan and Eerdmans were the two big for the Reform tradition. And those companies, about Baker, they've gone belly up and they've merged with these other things. And so that happened all around the time when I was getting into the market. And so when I started, I assumed that company would market for me, and that is a critical error. And in the end, because I had been working on what the Alliance Pray team, I had a constituency inside the framework of my denomination. I don't know if we have a church in Norway, but we're in 42 nations for the Canadian branch, and the American one is in 80. And so we're all across the planet. And so my book was marketed for me by the denomination. They put that book in the hands of all the missionaries across the planet, who then would introduce it to their constituents and so on. So that created a huge hand up that was unexpected. because I just didn't understand marketing. And you're right. If you're a local church pastor, you say, let's take up an offering now. And that goes into the local church to pay for the, for the Sunday school and for the worship service and for the ushers training and for the poor people to get benevolent offering and so on and so forth. And the wage of the pastor, that's all you're doing. So to actually put your name forward, I didn't want to have my picture on a card because I just thought that was putting myself forward in the wrong kind of a way. And now I've learned that I had to get past that. People will not consider your product unless they know they can trust that your product is trustworthy and they want to know who you are. And if you don't do that, you're going to be in trouble. So, I mean, that's why social media is so powerful, because they can listen to you, they can see you. In fact, I just was on a podcast before this one in Ireland. And so that was my second one. The lady interviewed me the first time. She liked what I had to say. And then she invited friends to come onto the podcast. And I met some of the friends. And then they said, hey, we'd like to invite you to come to Ireland. Would you come? I said, yes. Now, I just talked to a marketer who said, there is one old-fashioned method that works. I said, what's that? She said, get a bunch of business cards and collect them from everybody that you meet in those things. And then that becomes an implied sanction to put them on your email list.
Okay.
If they give you their business card. That's very old-fashioned.
Yeah.
But so you go to these things, you do an event, say, here's my card, can I have yours? And and then take all those cards and get your admin to enter that on your MailChimp, on your email thing, and then invite people to things that would speak to their audience. And if they're in your audience, they're interested in you.
Yeah, well, you've got to get that mailing list up somehow. I have it. I remember what I wanted to ask you, and it does tie into what we're discussing now. And it is, you discussed having all of those social media channels around you, and you've just spoken about MailChimp, which is email marketing. But you've got the YouTube channel, you've got Instagram or Twitter, or whichever of these channels.
Facebook, yep.
That's a full-time job. And creating that content it's a constant battle.
Well, yes.
It's a constant process. How, and writing books and your ministry, and how do you manage it? Is that why are you actually only 30 years old and used to have lots of hair? What's the story?
I lie around you midnight 6, so I figured I better use that time. Yeah, right. So no, what you put your finger on is the most important thing. When I first started, it was me in the room, and then COVID hit and I was stuck. Yeah. And I realized I needed somebody who understood social marketing far better than I did to take that on. I had some volunteers at first, and volunteers were very kind. But then if they get a job offer, if their husband moves and gets a job in the next town, you lose your volunteer.
Yeah.
And so we tried to do that over Zoom and it didn't work. And if somebody who's a volunteer doesn't want to, they don't. And then actually, even if the person's highly committed, life happens. And, maybe they can't do it anymore because something has occurred and you have to. So what I discovered I needed to do was to hire someone. And that, of course, I'm in a faith-based mission and we had to have the money to do this. The money did come in. And when that was made possible, because that group in Los Angeles would pay me to be their chaplain and to teach with them once a week. And the chaplaincy thing across thousands of miles isn't the same as when you're in town. When you're in town, you show up at their house and you have coffee and then you talk with them. When you're on Zoom, you have to set up a separate meeting and you do a very controlled kind of thing. And it created enough income to be able to hire someone who had the expertise. And here's what I did. When I started, I did it all. And I was tired. You got to know, tired. So what I tried to do was to combine a bunch of things. So I'd write a blog and then I would record the blog and put it on Facebook and YouTube. Then I would take the blogs and combine them into a writing project. And I tried to put the three things together. The trouble was when you're dealing with those things, the way that you write for each of them is a little bit different. You really don't write a blog to write a book, and you really don't write a blog to broadcast a YouTube or a Facebook thing. But I learned that the hard way. I made the mistake and then I discovered that I couldn't do it. Thank you very much. And I had no energy. And my wife was whining about how come I'm tired, So in the course of time, I started to ask this question: what is getting the most following? And I discovered that the blog had to be, at least 3 times a week or you'd lose your audience. Did I want to do it 3 times a week? No, I could sustain 1. I couldn't sustain 3. So should I do that? No. And, but I do have, I've been a pastor for years and I have series of sermons that I've preached, and a television studio contacted a friend of mine to find a preacher for a Sunday morning thing at no charge. We had to produce the sermon. So we had to find someone who could do that professionally. And you told me you looked at some of that on my YouTube channel. And yes, I do have a professionally produced video. So here's what I did. I would write a blog. I would preach the sermon. I would put it on TV. I would put it on YouTube. And it was one creative thing that produced 4 hits. And if I could, here's the reality. The ones who watch me on television aren't interested in seeing me read my blog, because that's a different audience. Those are shut-ins who can't get to church on a Sunday. But there are people who are lively and want to read it on Tuesday, or watch the YouTube video on Saturday night when they're kicking around or lying in bed, getting ready to sleep, getting prepared for Sunday morning service or whatever. So you multiply the points of entry with the same material being repeated in formats that are helpful to you.
This reminds me of the story of the fishes and the loaves. So, just multiplying your content.
I guess so.
Multiplying out of one loaf. So it is, and that's such an important factor, repurposing content. I think people try and create absolutely new content for each channel, which is not a bad idea, but you can take one piece of content and break it down, like you say, into blogs, into smaller posts,
the other thing is I teach Zoom courses. And actually, Zoom happened because everybody had no choice because COVID hit.
Yeah.
And so grandma couldn't hug her 3-year-old grandchild. And the 3-year-old grandchild couldn't hug grandma. So the 3-year-old and grandma got on Zoom. And they talked to each other. And it's the almost in-person meeting, that we're doing right now. Anyway, the bottom line was, because that occurred, I took the content that I had taught locally in a small group and put that into a Zoom thing, and it would become a test group for the books I was writing. And so it was actually social pressure on me because I had a constituency that was waiting for the next chapter. And so that's how I wrote this book on hearing the voice, or Jack Canfield. I had 127 readers and go through this, 127. And what Canfield said was, if you want to sell a book, you got to tell a story. If you don't tell a story, you're not going to sell a book unless you got some aficionado who likes detail. But if you have a story, and so what I did was, I had people in their teens and 20s in a small group. I had a Chinese church of 20s and 40s. I had a Filipino group. I had a professional office. I had retirees. I had a broad swath across this. And I had people from different demographics and different ethnics, 127 readers. If one person from that group said, I didn't understand the story or the story didn't grab, I'd rewrite the story and present it to them again. And so my teaching of the content became my test group. It would also become my YouTube content. It would also become my blog content. So what I did was I economized my time and learned to give the things that were technical to my admin, who loves to play with computers, and create things and that kind of thing. So she's the one who found the television person for the video capture. I said, look, we got to find someone who's doing this, who's going to be professional. We don't have a lot of resources. And she said, there's a video school in town. Let's get one of the students. And so we applied there. They didn't bite, but one of their friends did. And it's quite professional. So
it looked great. I mean, I would have thought you've got a great face for radio, but the TV was fantastic.
Well, appreciation. I got a radio face for the TV. But now I have TV.
For the TV voice, yeah.
No, now I have TV. Now there's the podcast thing. And so a podcast puts you in front of different constituencies across the planet. And so I have spoken to people all across the United States. I've spoken to Australians. I've spoken to South Asians. I've spoken now to a Norwegian. I just got off the thing with an Irish person who came from Africa. And so the African wanted me to do multiple broadcasts. And so I'm doing that. And what you're doing every time you speak on a podcast is you're introducing yourself to a different constituency that somebody has been diligent to prepare work for. And if you're a good host on a pod, if you're a good person on the podcast, they'll actually thank you, invite you back. This, of course, repetition is what sells. Repetition is what sells.
Yeah.
You know that repetition is what sells.
Yeah.
You have to keep telling people about your product. You have to tell them why they should consider doing this. And you have to create an opportunity for them to be able to buy, to purchase. You have to do that. A call to action. And if you don't do that, you're not going to succeed. Now, I didn't know about that. That's what those guys at Harrison's company taught me. If you don't do a call to action, there won't be any.
Well, I tell my students the whole time, and whenever they show me anything, I say, where's the call to action? Because we are not doing marketing and advertising and promotion just so that people can hear our voice and to the goodness of our hearts. The client wants a sale,
Yes.
either slightly later if you're doing brand-related communications, or lead generate. There's got to be something that your communication spurs you on to do, to read more, to learn more, to go and download something, to buy something. And
Yes.
that call to action is sometimes marketers just forget it, which I'm like, how can you do this? No client's going to pay you just to send out a meaningless fluff. So I think that's important. Just one thing on your book and talking about the books, the importance of a catchy title. And if we look at Chicken Soup for the Soul, that's a catchy title. And I spoke
Yes.
to a fantastic guest called James I. Bond, who talks
James
about,
Bond.
yeah, exactly, who has a book called Brain Glue, and it's about creating a title or a story or hook that challenges people's preconceptions or stays in people's minds. So if you talk about the book Chicken Soup for the Soul,
Yep.
You can't forget that. How
That's
did
right.
you get have you got that right yet? Which one of your titles do you think does that the best?
This is the one right here. This is the one that was developed. Hey, are you there? It's me, God. How to listen to
Okay.
some no one.
Yeah.
And Jack Canfield wrote the forward to that. See?
Yeah.
Now, the Healing Prayer Book was not my. So here's what I can tell you. The picture on the cover of the Healing Prayer Book is a piece of Japanese art. As soon as people see it, they cry. It's a picture of a shattered bowl that's been repaired with gold.
Mm.
And so the shattered bowl that's repaired is more precious than the bowl was before. And so when
Lovely,
people
yeah.
see, I've done, this has happened like 50 times. I'll bring the book out and show them, and they'll start to cry when they see the picture of this broken thing that's been made more precious through the repair process. And so that metaphor speaks profoundly. Now, that Healing Prayer title was the idea of the people at Whitaker House, the company. Now, I will tell you that having a professional company do this is far more effective than doing it as a self-published author.
Mm.
So the small firm couldn't do this because they couldn't afford it, and I wound up doing the marketing. And then when I did the Hey book that I just showed you, I marketed that myself, and there was euphoria for the first 6 months. And the sales drop right off unless you're in their face with the product again.
Yeah.
With a publishing house that has a track record of success in the niche that you're trying to market to, and the constituency attached to Whitaker House does fit, they hired a marketing firm. They put me in touch with radio, television, and podcast programs. They were the large ones that were across the United States and around the world. And that set up conversations to make this thing happen. So it was so much nicer to do that than have to do it all myself, and they created a beautiful one sheet. I mean, if I was to create the one sheet, I'd do that. How do we say it? The rookie errors? You know what I'm saying? I'd do the things
But
that
again, that's why we hire professionals. And the key thing that you've mentioned there is that it's going to niche companies that understand your particular industry. If you go to generic folks, if you go to folks who don't know your particular niche or don't understand your market, you may as well do it yourself. So there's a reason, and it might be more expensive. You might, have to give away a slightly larger chunk of the pie, but they will generally deliver, and the results will outweigh the inputs.
Well, so for example, I wanted to do an audio book with the self-published book, the Hey book, with a nice title. They paid for me to do the audio book for the Healing Prayer book. And right now they're paying for me to create a training video that will be used in tandem. And in fact, in 2 weeks' time, I will fly into the United States, go into a studio and record 15 10-minute segments that will be attached to the 15 chapters of the book. And they will create a package where a church can use the material and then train their teams with a video and with the book so that you create an outcome that is desirable for your constituency. Now, they're paying for that. It's not, if I had to pay for, recording my own audiobook, that's tens of thousands of dollars. Yeah. Plus the cost of flying in and staying wherever you're going to be staying to get it done, and your meals and your travel expenses and so on. This is a very different world when someone says, I believe in your product so much. We know it's going to give a return on our investment. So you actually, in a way, you have to sell yourself to the book product thing. Now, in this case,
that's going to be that should be a discussion for another day, because the importance of personal branding can't be, I don't know what the word is, can't be underestimated. And again, as a pastor, must obviously be that slight balance between thinking, oh, I'm self-promotion, perhaps I'm getting a little bit too big for my boots. I'm thinking it's more me versus the message. And that balance must be quite difficult in your space. But let's not.
Well,
I'm not going to go into that right now, because that's a separate discussion. But what I'd like to close off with is, you started off in your office, nearly in tears, complaining to the Lord like Job, "Why me?" And
not quite. He had covered boils. I wasn't covered with boils, but okay, there you go.
From a modern perspective, perhaps closer. But nobody wanted your book. You didn't have the numbers. Tell me how that is different now after 4 books. How has that changed? You maybe don't have more than 3,000 or however many folks in your congregation.
I'm no longer the local pastor, so that's okay. Although I'm going to a church that's about 1,000, but it's not 3,000. Anyway, what's happened now is people who have known me over the years through the ministry of that group called Alliance Pray, in a second will say, you know what? We know that you're not going to tell us something that's false or phony, or you're not trying to. You've served for years in a volunteer capacity. We know you. In fact, just last night, I was talking to the head of the Christian Missionary Alliance Church in Vietnam about my going there to speak to his pastors. And when I said, oh, by the way, this book was sanctioned by the Canadian branch. This book was developed under their auspices and given to all our international workers. And oh, by the way, the Australians used the book, and the Americans used the book, and the Canadians used the book. That man nodded his head and said, yes, we know you. And so it creates a different kind of entree for that constituency. And right now I'm currently under the oversight of my own district. And so they know you're not a nut when you apply to be considered for something. They know that you've got some sort of process to check out whether or not you're an idiot or whether you're a solid citizen or something. And we have track record of 20 years and 5 books. It's different than when you're starting with your first one.
Yeah.
They'll say, oh yes, I read your book back in the day and it was helpful to me, and you developed that? I said, yes. So then they'll give you a second look and then invite you to an event in their region or something.
So this goes into, again, I'm taking it back to branding and marketing, brand consistency. You've been consistent over these years. The quality has delivered what you are saying it's going to deliver.
Yep.
And there are people who, for example, like on not referral sites, but on, Google, would be able to give, or Amazon would be able to give recommendations that, yes, this does indeed do what it purports to offer.
Yes,
so
that's correct.
All of these, being in the missionary field or being in the spiritual field does have the same sort of structure as anyone trying to sell a tire or
sure, yeah, or can be. Yep, that's right.
Yeah. So my last thing with you is, what is something interesting about you that we may not have found out on social media or on this podcast today?
Oh my, I don't know if you want to know all that stuff. I love to play the piano. Well,
you're obviously number one, in the top 10 for some reason, so let's go.
Well, I love to laugh, and I'm not your typical pastor. So I'll get up in the pulpit, and just like I'm laughing with you about serious matters, I'll do that while I'm preaching or talking. And so I do that when I'm preaching. It doesn't show up as well in the TV thing because it's a much more cut and dried thing. But when I'm live, I just love to tease people while I'm talking. I do that, and then they tease me back, and it creates this delightful opportunity to get to know each other better. The other thing is I've traveled a lot, and I've done that as a pastor, and that's an unusual thing. In one year, I did 5 nations, as a pastor in a local church. Most pastors in local churches are people who simply want to serve their people in their local constituency. But I'm what you call a global church pastor. I'm global and I'm local at the same time. And that has always been so. I didn't even try to do that. I tripped into that, and it just became the ordinary thing that I would do. So I don't know if that would make me an unusual pastor. And to be a writer and to be a local church pastor and to be a world traveler is a strange combination in the best of times. But
only there was some other missionary like that who went to multiple countries and wrote letters and books. I think
Paul the Apostle.
Not that I want to compare you with him, but I mean, there are some. You're not the first in that boat.
Well, let me show you more thorn in the flesh here.
There's a nice spit waiting for you in Rome, I think.
Yes, yeah.
So where can I send folks to read up a little bit more about you and to find out more about your books? I'll put a link in the description, but you can come from the horse's mouth itself.
Did I send you my social media links? I think I did.
Yeah.
Okay, then publish it. But the easiest way is to go to my website, which is www.spirit, like Holy Spirit, equipped like equipment, spiritequipped.com. And the reason the name is because I equip spiritual disciplines. That's the reason. So spiritequipped.com, there's links there to all my social media, and there's links there to my blogs and my YouTube channel. And there's an ad for the television or the courses that I'm offering and so on. Always I'm offering a course or two. And that was, by the way, that's when I crashed and burned. There was one 6-month window where I taught 6 courses. And that's nuts. So now I do 1 or 2, and then I'll do the odd one off and that kind of thing. But there are free offerings that I do as well. And so if people want to participate, I'm going to be doing a free offering in 2 weeks' time on the Sunday, my Sunday evening in Eastern time. I don't know what.
Well, I've got both US and European listeners. So
okay, well, there you go. Yeah. So then I'm in the New York time zone or the Toronto time zone. It's the same time zone. And I do free offerings once a month. And my goal there is to simply give people an opportunity to be able to participate and taste what it is that I'm offering. And if you're interested in taking courses, I usually say, oh, by the way, I'm going to offer this course at such and such a time. And I make sure that people understand I'm not charging anything for the freebies. Yeah. And so that's the easiest way to get to know me. Or you could watch my YouTube channel, Spirit Equipped Ministries. Or you could check out my Instagram page. There's always little short clips on that and reels and so on.
Well, Pastor, obviously no rest for the wicked. So hopefully...
the Son of Man is nowhere to lay his head. So let's not just... Jesus was busy and so was the devil.
Exactly. So it was a delight chatting to you, and a very interesting chat about how digital marketing is also important in your field, in the book publishing, and some interesting tips and tricks there. So I hope folks get something out of this that they can use in their own ministries. So excellent. Pastor David, thank you so much and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, and may the same be true for you.
Now, before we wrap up, don't forget to show some love for From Startup to Wunderbrand by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. If you'd like to help us grow, tell your friends, share on social media, and leave us a review. For those of you who want to dive a little bit deeper into the topic, join me on Twitter @Kuhne. Let's connect and chat about all things branding and digital. Until next time.